Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall.
No, you're
laughter.
not.
Oh my God, David, deadpan. Hello, Mutts. I am Devin Shepherd,
And I'm David B. Jacobs.
and we are Cadaver Dogs. I totally threw you off, didn't I? I had to do it.
No, that's fine.
Well, David, guess what today is? I mean, you obviously know because we've been planning for it for a month,
It's
but
our 100th movie that we're discussing.
What? I wish I had stats of like 500 websites for research, 30 books read for research, 100 movies, 10 of which were blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't have any of that because that would be a lot. But like, imagine it's something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, at some point we can figure out those numbers.
Why? I would be so sad. Amount of hours spent.
Oh, I don't want that. But I'd be curious in how many American movies versus how many Japanese movies versus how many other countries, because I think America and Japan are the only ones that we've had more than one. Maybe Canada or England.
Yeah, I think Canada. Yeah, Canada, England.
Yeah.
We got a Thailand in there.
Yes, we did.
Did we have a couple Italy? Maybe only one Italy.
I think just the one Italy, but I could be forgetting something.
We have to do
Yeah.
Giallo next year. This one has officially been like American year. We got to get some.
Well, I only just started watching Giallo movies.
Same.
Yeah. Have we done a French movie ever? Like, there's so many great French horror movies. I don't know if we've ever covered one.
No, but they're on our list that we've
Yeah.
been. But we do have one that we'll probably do in the coming months that is French.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm glad we will break out of our all English language movies.
Well, we're not deviating very far today. It is still, it's American with an English director. Is it English film? English American?
Is Kubrick himself English? I thought he was American, but lived in England.
Oh, he lived in England.
He lived
That's
in
a good
England.
question.
But
His
I think
daughter has
he's...
an English accent?
Well, yeah, because she lived in England. I mean, she would be considered English, I guess, but in the way that we're considered American, even though we're not Native American.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm getting us back on track. For our 100th movie today, we decided to cover a film that would otherwise be uncomparable to the other films that we would pair with it. It would make the conversation a little too hard. So we thought The Shining would be the perfect one to cover on its own in all its, I don't want to say glory because we're not going to glorify this film, but in all its shininess.
And it's a weird episode because it's the only movie we're covering today. We're not comparing it with anything. So you guys can let us know what you think of that different structure.
Yeah, I am curious. Like, if y'all want to hear more like single ones, we'll see how this one goes.
Yes.
I feel like this one.
I'm a little intimidated by this movie, I will admit. So we'll see how that goes, because there's been a lot of discussion about The Shining, as I'm sure you are all very well aware that this is a monolithic movie, and we don't want to treat it like a monolithic movie because it's just a movie.
I couldn't agree more. I am also intimidated. And yeah, I mean, a lot has been said about this film, but in my research, I found a lot of new things that I'm really interested in talking about. So I'm looking forward to that discussion today.
Yeah, totally. I found a lot of those. I also found a lot of bullshit in my research, which we will probably discuss, but there's a lot of bullshit out there.
Yes. Well, should I do a quick summary to familiarize our audience with the film?
Yes, please.
Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, his wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and their young son, Danny, played by Danny Lloyd, become the winter caretakers of the Overlook Hotel in Colorado. Danny possesses something called the Shining, which gives him psychic abilities, including telepathy and precognition. Wendy does most of the work around the hotel, while Jack is set on using his time in isolation to write his great American novel. Danny begins to see terrifying visions of the hotel's past. Jack becomes increasingly unstable under the influence of the sinister forces inhabiting the place. During an intense snowstorm, Jack descends into madness and threatens the lives of Wendy and Danny. Danny sends a distress signal to fellow Shiner Dick Halloran, played by Scatman Crothers, who is the hotel's head chef. Dick flies to save the family, only to be murdered by Jack wielding an axe. Jack then turns his axe to his family, chasing them through the hedge maze outside. In the maze, Jack suffers an attack and dies in the snow before he is able to reach his family, the hotel claiming yet another victim. This is The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, written by Diane Johnson and Stanley Kubrick, based on the novel by Stephen King.
All right, so the first thing we want to get into, because we're talking about like demystifying the movie and whatnot, and everyone's always talking about it's super serious and whatnot. But the first time I watched this movie back in like freshman year of college or whatever it was, I thought this movie was really funny.
The
And
first time you watched it, you thought it was funny?
yeah,
Oh, wow.
of course, the first time. So I want to ask, like, do you think that's intentional? Is this like actually supposed to be a funny movie? Is it a parody even of horror films to some degree? Not like exclusively, but to some degree, do you think that's in there?
Yeah, I guess I never, like, accepted there to be humor in this film because people always say this is the scariest movie they ever seen. For me, the first time I watched it, yeah, it was scary. I guess it never really, like, lived up to that scariest movie I've ever seen. But on this watch, yeah, I mean, there's definitely comedy. I feel like there are some editing choices and some, like, tonal, like, choices in terms of how the rhythm of a scene goes, where it is edited kind of to fit a comedy. And if you're like, "Oh, well, why would Stanley Kubrick be doing that?" Then it started to unravel more of like, there are so many horror tropes in this film that kind of do feel like they're being poked at or inverted.
Yeah, and like a lot of the time, there are jump scares in this movie. Most of the jump scares are all fake outs. Like he doesn't use too many jump scares for the actual scary things. Instead, it is Jack ripping a paper out of his typewriter and it's shot like it's a knife and it's literally just a paper. It's Thursday. Even the bit with red rum in the mirror, and it's like, "Oh, it's murder spelled backwards." Like, that's a bit in Troll too, which I
Yeah,
think
every time they have the title, I did laugh because I was like, it's always like so epic and it's like, "Oh, Thursday." And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's okay. Why? Okay.
And there are things like the man in the bear suit, which is given no explanation at all in this movie. It's just randomly a bear guy in a bear suit giving another ghost a blowjob. And then like, when he's running around and freaking out at all the ghosts, and then one of them just like the fancy guy all dressed up and smiling, being like, "Oh, it's a great party, right?" And then she's like horrified of that. And like he's not doing anything threatening. He's covered in blood, but he's just like drinking.
Yeah, there are so many things that happen in this film that are seemingly unrelated, and we can do our best to try to analyze today what they mean. But as we said, this film has been analyzed to death. But there are so many things that it almost feels like, yeah, Stanley Kubrick decided, I'm going to make a horror movie, and I'm just going to put in a bunch of horror tropes and like poke fun at the genre. And it's possible that none of it makes sense, but people are going to like dive into it, trying to find some sort of reasoning behind everything.
Even the bloody elevator, like what was that in the book? I don't remember.
I don't remember.
Yeah. If it is in the book, then it probably is done a little more sincerely in the book, because in the movie, it doesn't feel like a sincere scare with the blood in the elevator. It's still like a freaky image that you wouldn't be wrong if you're scared by that, but it feels like a joke to me.
I think it's fair, and I will say though, this movie did scare me, and I do find it
Same.
scary, and it doesn't always have to make sense. And a
Yes.
lot, I think, of what we're going to discuss today is like there's only so much that we can say that hasn't been said, so why not try to break down as much as possible? And I know I will definitely play devil's advocate today just to
Cool.
see if we can get somewhere.
Yeah. And to be clear, a movie can be both funny and scary, even in the same
Oh yeah.
breath. And I think that's like if you want to talk about those going together, it's almost like the humor disarms you and it all blends together. And it's I've talked before about how when things tend to scare me, it's because they're breaking logic. And
Mm.
That is, the idea of breaking logic is something that is used in comedy, but it's also used in horror. And this movie employs it in both ways, and often it's not clear which one it's supposed to be. And I think that a lot of these moments can be funny or scary,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the point.
Because it's the building of the tension and then the release. And I will
Mhm.
say this movie does tension so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always just like, ugh. Okay, well, let's get a little bit into the themes of the film. Oh, and the answer to your question is like, yeah, I think that this is somewhat a parody to a horror film,
Cool.
in simplistic forms. So one of the obvious themes of this film seems to be destiny or fatalism. I mean, we're introduced with Danny, who has a ability to sense the future. Questionable if other people can do this as well.
Yes. So to clarify, because in the book that's even more so. I have read the book. In the book, Tony, his imaginary friend, winds up being revealed. Spoilers, as literally Danny himself from the future.
Oh, they say that in the book?
Yes, that is in the book.
Wow.
His middle name is Anthony.
Oh, there you go, Anthony.
But in the movie, that's like never said to be a thing, and it's not clear if that's really the case here or not. Although I still think that Tony seems to be a bit of a red herring. He's not he's presented as something scary, but ultimately is like warning them what's going on. But Danny is still sensing the future. He's still sensing what's going to happen at this hotel. He's still aware of things, or even if it's not the future, at least sensing that there's something wrong with his hotel. At least sensing across space.
Yes, across space because he does get a sense of the past as well.
Yes, that's true, because all the ghosts are from the past.
Yeah. So when we're looking at who Tony is in the movie, because it is not stated that he is himself from the future, do you think that it is presenting Tony as something different than from what the book says? Or do you think it's just like not apparent or not needed?
I definitely don't think it's needed. Tony feels so out of place in the Shining movie,
I
honestly.
know.
Yeah,
It's like we could have had everything without him and nothing would have been different. I think he is supposed to be like a physical representation of Danny's power. And I think that it does, like with Tony, make Danny more of an outsider, I guess.
yeah. I mean, what also is like maybe they would have gone more into that, but Danny Lloyd was a child actor, and they had limited number of days and hours with him, and they couldn't shoot more of him. So I still think that he is just as much protagonist as Jack and Wendy, but also his story does feel cut down from what it may have been otherwise if they had been literally physically able to shoot more with him.
Yeah. And that's just something that happens when you adapt a novel to screen is that there are sacrifices you're going to have to make due to legal restrictions, like working a child actor, but also it's a different medium and,
Yeah.
things do have to be more visual than psychological. And I think all of that, especially when you're adapting a psychological thriller, like there are things that are just not going to work in the film. And so there's always back and forth between, is the movie better? Is the book better? And they just have to be different beasts. They can have the same as long as they have the same tones and the same themes, like, to me, that makes a good adaptation.
Yes, I agree. And now, since you asked a little bit ago about whether Danny is the only one with the Shining or not, we can ask that. I mean, I think it's clear that Halloran has the Shining. That's
Yes, but does he have precognition? I'm not sure if The Shining is telepathy and precognition or just yeah, what is it?
I think it varies from person to person. I think it manifests a
Oh.
little bit differently in each person it affects. Like they even talk, even in the movie, I think it's Grady who says like, Danny, your son has the greatest ability I've seen, or something like that, he says. So it is shown that Danny's power is stronger than most other people with the Shining.
Mhm.
So it will manifest a little bit differently from person to person. Halloran has the Shining, but he doesn't shine as strongly as Danny.
Yeah. I did have questions when watching this film was like, "Oh, I wonder if Jack and or Wendy have The Shining as well."
Yes.
Did you see any evidence of either of them having The Shining?
Jack, I think, definitely has The Shining. I
Oh,
think it's not as
interesting.
strong. Obviously, Halloran doesn't clock him as someone with The Shining, but I don't think the events of the movie make sense if he doesn't have it. Because Halloran discusses, like, oh, you have The Shining, therefore you're going to see all these things in the hotel. This is
Right.
like an active hotel. It is seasonal, so no one's there during the winter, but in the summer season, Well, there are a lot of people in this hotel, and none of them see anything apparently. So why does Jack see stuff? Because he has The Shining.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, well, I guess it's not necessarily very clear if Grady saw something. All we know about Grady is that he did murder his family, and that could be because there was stuff happening in the hotel that like possessed him and made him do that, or he kind of maybe kicked off some of the bad things that were happening in the
Hmm.
hotel. We don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always read it that he had The Shining as well.
I feel like I want to say that Jack has The Shining, or at least had The Shining. Jack is a very sad character, not necessarily empathetic character, but a very sad character, and I feel like he does feel threatened by his family. And to see someone like Danny have this ability, this powerful ability, and Jack, who has an addiction problem, who feels like he is not living up to his full potential because he hasn't written his book yet. I feel like he feels very emasculated,
Yep,
and
definitely.
that he feels like threatened by his son. So I feel like whether or not he has The Shining, maybe a little bit, maybe he had it more before, but I feel like he definitely doesn't have it now.
Hmm.
But that's
Hmm.
to say though, it's like depends on what you think the ghosts are, or the people around the hotel. If they are actual ghosts that are then seen by
Yep.
the family with The Shining, or a person with The Shining, or if they are the hotel gathering all this energy and putting that forth. So it's more, is it the hotel creating them, or the people breaking into this other realm?
Yeah, or like, are they ghosts in the traditional sense that we think of, where it is the person's soul lingering, or even is it more a representation of a memory, if that makes sense?
Hmm. Yes. And I do have a quote. Of course, I didn't write down who said this quote, but there's a quote in the film that says, "When something happens, it can leave a trace." I'm pretty sure this is Dick saying something, saying it to Danny in order
Yeah,
to
I think
describe
that
it.
was, yeah.
So yeah, goes just like using that to go back to what you were saying. It's like it could be something so powerful that it does leave an imprint, which is a theory in parapsychology, that there is like an
Hmm.
energy that leaves an imprint and is attached to a space, right?
Yeah,
Which does give power to the space. Do you see the Overlook as a haunted house?
we'll define haunted house.
I right? Like, is it a haunted hotel, or is it a place that is evil?
Are those exclusive?
I don't think so. Like, to me, this is kind of
Yeah.
more Amityville House,
Hmm.
right? The stories are very similar.
Yeah, I think we talked about that in our Amityville episode, how it felt like The Shining. That the house possesses the husband and makes him try to kill the wife and kid. Spoiler for Amityville Horror.
And when did that happen? That was in the 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a few years earlier.
Oh, the book was published in 1977, which is the same year that the Shining novel came out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that
Hmm.
this was either starting to film or getting ready to film.
Wow, that fast. Damn.
Oh, because Kubrick read a manuscript before it was published.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This is what happened to King's books, which is so crazy. He kinda just, like, had a direct funnel to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because I think Carrie was also one that was in manuscript form.
Really? That's so weird because that's his first book.
I know.
Huh.
Anyway, getting back on track. We're
Um,
recording in the afternoon this time, guys. It's a different mindset for sure.
it's a very different mindset. And also my brain is like all cluttered because I'm shooting a short film in 2 weeks, so my brain is all over the place.
I made David record. Okay, but
No,
get
you
back to the
didn't.
question. Do you think The Overlook is a haunted house? Or do you think The Shining is a haunted house movie?
I mean, yes, it's definitely a haunted house movie because I think that's a looser term. And yes, I think it's a haunted house because they talk about the power of the place. To me, that means it's a haunted house.
Mhm.
That you have these ghosts, whatever they are, that cannot leave this place, that they are confined here. And when you go in there, you are subject to their persuasion. I know Halloran says that they can't hurt you. I think that's because he didn't shine strongly enough for them to hurt him. Although
Mm.
even then, he talks about being afraid of room 237 specifically. I mean, he says like, "Oh, I'm not afraid of it," but
I'm
you
not
could tell in his
afraid.
performance that he totally is. He's like, "Don't go in there." So maybe the woman in room 237 is also one of the stronger ghosts in the mansion, in the hotel.
Mm.
And it seems like that is the case. As for Wendy, if Wendy shines, because that's tricky, because she only really sees anything at the very end of the movie. And here's something that just now occurred to me. What if Danny or Jack are through their powers, are whether consciously or unconsciously pushing these images into Wendy? That she's
Hmm.
sort of getting the shining through contact instead of by her own abilities.
That's interesting. I mean, one can even ask with that theory, though, if Danny's pushing these images into Jack's head then.
Interesting. Ooh, interesting.
Because we don't see a lot of Jack and Danny interactions in the film. We see one after Jack is pretty possessed, but we do know the history of Danny getting abused. So Danny was abused slash may still be abused by his father. There definitely is a weird dynamic there where we can assume that Danny is scared of his dad in a certain way.
Mm.
So maybe he does see Jack as threatening and he could be pushing these images into Jack to kind of live up to Danny's idea of who his father is.
Maybe, and I still like toying with the idea that it's not intentional, like, going with that theory that Danny is
Oh,
sort
yeah,
of.
I don't think
Yeah.
any of this is intentional.
I mean, it's easy to believe that both of them have The Shining because they are family, and we know that The Shining is to some extent hereditary because Halloran's grandmother also shined. So we know there is a hereditary element to that. So it is
Yes.
believable that they both have The Shining. But if we stick with it's only Danny and he's pushing the images into Jack, then it could also be just completely unconscious and not something that he's doing on purpose.
Oh, yeah, no, I totally don't think. Yeah, I think this is an unconscious thing.
And to roll with that thematically, not to get too much into the alcoholism element of it, yet we will get into element of it, or to get too much into Dr. Sleep, but we do see in the future that Danny also becomes an alcoholic like his father. And I think that even in this movie, there are parallels being drawn between Danny and Jack. That Jack has all these demons he's dealing with. Danny has Tony, so he is also having this like sort of threat. Jack becomes possessed by the hotel, maybe. Danny becomes possessed by Tony. And
Yeah.
there is sort of this element there. So with Jack's struggles with self-control, it makes sense that Danny is also having these struggles with self-control and is through no will of his own pushing evil upon his father and or mother.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I definitely
Mm.
agree. Okay, yes, I'm excited to talk about that stuff. I wanna close out Haunted House, and then we can move forward because I think all of that is so juicy. Okay, so the one the one last thought that I had about the Haunted House that I did wanna touch on.
Okay.
This movie has so many themes of gothic horror, yet I
Yeah.
don't think this is a gothic horror.
Interesting. Why not?
Okay, well, the themes that are established is like a haunted place or a place with a power, a dark past or a
Hmm.
secret history. It's isolated. It's only a few characters, and they interact with ghosts. Things happening to them. So all that to me is very gothic. But this movie feels so I don't know, maybe because it's so modern in terms of like the 70s sense that I just like can't do. And it's not brooding. Like it's not a brooding horror like My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It to was. You
Yeah.
know? This movie seems very flashy, and if we are talking about it as a parody of horror films, it does kind of fit into, like, a flashy parody, not, like, deep emotional
Hmm.
but, like, it kind of does. I don't know. Do you see it as a gothic horror?
I think it is.
You think it is? I just, like, I don't want to call it one.
It's not what you think of when you think of gothic horror, but I think it still fits enough to, like, at least be gothic adjacent or neo-gothic or something like that. You sent me a write-up by Diane Johnson, who co-wrote the film, and she talked about having a big background in gothic horror, that she read a lot of gothic works, and she recommended a few to Kubrick as well while they were working on it because he wanted to do more research on the genre. Although when she recommended him all these gothic horror, she was also like, "But I don't think that'll actually help with the movie. I just think you'll like them."
Yeah.
So, but it feels like that is something that was discussed between them while they were writing. That gothic horror was an influence on the film. And I think the book
Yeah.
is gothic as well. I think the book is even more clearly gothic because it's without the visual language, it's not going to be as obviously flashy.
That I will agree with. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe this feels not as gothic because it has more jump scares and
Hmm.
fast visuals and, like, big movie stuff than the brooding, and maybe this is the point I was getting to, than the like brooding, quiet, intense gothic tone that we usually see when we're watching a gothic horror movie.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up Diane Johnson, because hearing about her experience on this was fascinating. So the story goes is that Kubrick was reading through a bunch of manuscripts. He wanted to make a horror movie, so he's reading a bunch of horror manuscripts and wanted to find the perfect horror story to adapt into a movie. And Diane Johnson was a writer. She wrote something called The Shadow Knows, which does seem gothic. And she said it was full of tense racial issues and suburban, like, women issues, and about urban violence, which I think plays into this film. And ultimately, Kubrick did not choose her manuscript. He chose Stephen King's. But then he went to Diane Johnson, obviously impressed by her writing, and was like, "Can you adapt this book?" And Diane Johnson was like, "I'm going to bring what I know, which is these themes of like racial issues, domestic violence, and bring it into this movie. Not that it wasn't there already in the book, but just like make it a little bit stronger."
Apparently, Kubrick preferred the book that Johnson wrote to The Shining, and he told her that the reason he went with The Shining instead is because he thinks it's easier to make a movie out of an imperfect book. He's like, yeah, it's just your book is too good to make into a movie, so we're gonna go with this Stephen King trash instead. Basically, is what he said.
Amazing compliment,
I'm
I
like,
guess.
okay.
I don't know. Well, that did get me thinking though about the racial tensions presented in this film, if they are presented at all. One thing that is clearly presented in this film is the representation of Native Americans.
Yep.
You know, we are in Colorado, and Colorado definitely has a lot of Native American history and Native American decor. That's just what fucking Colorado looks like. I don't know what to tell you.
Yes. There are a lot of crackpot theories about this movie. If you watch the documentary Room 237, you'll be presented with many crackpot theories. And the one that I will entertain and actually agree with is that the movie is to some degree about the genocide of the Native Americans.
Yes.
That is straight up in the text. Like they talk about, oh yeah, we built it on Indian burial ground, and when the hotel was being built, we kept getting attacked by Native Americans, and we killed them all. So don't worry about that. It's like, okay, what now?
Yeah, I agree. I think like not a crackpot theory. I think Stanley Kubrick took out so many things from the book. Why would he choose to leave in this if he wasn't directly commenting on it?
Was this in the book? I don't think I don't remember if the Native American stuff was in the book, but I don't think it was because I'm just going off the Diane Johnson thing that you sent me. And she talked about this being something that her and Kubrick actually discussed. Was that it being about Native American genocide?
Yeah, and I mean, like, this was something that I wanted to do more research on because it was always, Native American burial ground, the haunted stereotype of horror.
White man's burden, Lloyd. Why does he say that? It doesn't follow anything. He just randomly says that.
Okay, before I go into my thing,
Go
can
on.
you expand on that?
Yeah, in the bar scene, Jack Nicholson, Jack Torrance, I mean, and same person,
It's a
and
person.
Lloyd the bartender are hanging out, and Jack orders a drink from Lloyd, and then just randomly says, "White man's burden, Lloyd," and that's the entire thing. Lloyd doesn't do anything to lead into that. Jack just says that out of nowhere and then continues to talk about his family. And it's like, what? Why did you say white man's burden?
Oh, I took it as he was referencing to his drink.
Oh, well, white man's burden isn't that like the same thing as manifest destiny?
Huh?
The white man's burden corresponds to the belief that the British Empire was the Englishman's divine burden to reign God's empire on earth,
Oh, I never heard of that.
and celebrates British colonialism as a mission of civilization that eventually would benefit the colonized natives.
I never heard that before. I had no idea.
Yeah, white man's burden is this kind of eugenicist idea, I guess, that the white people are superior and have the responsibility and therefore burden to take over the earth and to bring civility to all of these savage natives. It's not a good philosophy, but it is the
Wow.
one that led to like manifest destiny, which is the idea that the British colonists are destined to go from sea to sea in America and take out all the natives in between.
Well, shit, dude. Well, that's the thing that I learned today. Yeah, I think that actually feeds into a lot of what I was gonna mention then, and I think perfect
Great.
for that. Let's go to Devin's history corner. I actually had no idea about this thing called the Red Power movement of the 70s and 80s. Did you hear about this before?
You sent an article, but it was paywall locked, so I couldn't read it.
Oh, man. I am just surprised I'd never learned about this in the history books, and I was just fascinated to read about it. So, when there was the civil rights movement in the 60s, obviously it found, more rights for Black people, but the other race that came up to start to fight for equality was the Native Americans. And what we ended up seeing were Native American people fighting to claim back their land and make a stance against the United
Mhm.
States government for taking over their land. They would occupy land that the government stole from the Native Americans. One of them being Alcatraz, actually, was the first one.
Huh.
And then ultimately, the recent one before this film was made in the 70s was Wounded Knee, which, if you don't know, was a site of a Native American massacre in the 19th century. And the Wounded Knee protest ended up with American officials cutting off food supplies and ultimately not killing, maybe killing. I got shot to protesters. Anyway, the point being that it grew to be something violent during this time. And we're seeing a lot of violence between what we can presume are white men in America and Native Americans fighting back for their land. So, with that in mind, I feel like that definitely bled into the writing and specifically the character of Jack Torrance and is like at the top of mind when presenting a white family in a hotel that is a Native American burial ground and they're surrounded by Native American tapestry and artwork
Yep.
and white
Yeah.
man's burden.
Yeah, I mean, the movie makes it a point that this is still in Native American land. Like they're pretty straight up about that. So, yes, I do think that this movie is talking about the genocide of the Native Americans.
Yes.
Is what it comes down to.
And I do think specifically talking about white men being violent too. Like
Mhm.
Jack is insanely violent in more ways than one.
Yep. This is also one of the horror movies that actually fits the trope of the black man dies first. It's
Ah,
easy to
yes.
overlook that because it happens like 2 hours into the movie, but not only does Dick Halloran die first, he and Jack are the only people that actually die over the course of the movie, unless you count the ghosts, but they're already dead, so
Oh, you are right. You are right. Yeah.
and Halloran does not die in the book. So that is a change specific for the movie that the black man is killed.
Well, and that's interesting because originally Stanley Kubrick did not want to cast a black man in this role.
Really?
Yeah, the character still died. He wanted
Hmm.
to cast this actor named Slim Pickens. I
That sounds
cannot bel
familiar. I think I've seen him in something.
he's in a previous Kubrick film. I think he's in
Oh,
Strangelove.
that sounds right.
Is Strangelove the one that he did right before this?
No, Clockwork Orange was right before this. No,
Oh.
Barry Lyndon was right before this.
Anyway, he wanted to cast Slim Pickens, who's not black. And for some reason, Slim Pickens said no. And so he ended up casting Carruthers. Does that change anything? I don't know.
Well, it doesn't change anything in the final product. That's interesting because Halloran is kind of a stereotype.
As in, he's a magical black man.
Yeah, he definitely fits the the trope is called the magical Negro. I don't want to say that, but that's what it's called. That he's like literally magical and is there to give wisdom down, but he's also this just stereotype of a black man. He works for the white people. He's a cook. They use the N word in the movie to describe him like 3 times in a row.
They use the N word in a scene specifically pushing to go murder him
Yep.
and to disparage him.
Yes, they do.
And I feel like, yeah, that also makes commentary about what white man racism and violence. It's like, well, we are othering this race
Yeah,
and we're going to violently massacre them.
like Grady could say you have to kill this guy because he's gonna try to stop you, but instead he says you need to kill this guy because he is N-word.
Yeah. It's yeah. It
But also, the movie's not saying that's a good thing, to be clear. Like, we're supposed to be uncomfortable by that.
agreed. We're not supposed to like Jack, right?
We're not supposed to agree with what Jack does in the end. Definitely. I think that we can argue whether he's responsible for his actions or not, but we can get into that. But yeah, the movie is definitely playing with these power dynamics, many of which are racial, some of which are also gender power dynamics question mark.
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's gender dynamics in here. I mean, obviously, when we're presenting most of the film is 3 characters, not counting the ghosts. You're looking at a nuclear family, ding, 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 1980, and you're seeing the roles of a father and a mother, and obviously the gender stereotypes of those roles
Yep.
or the pushback against the gender stereotype
Yes.
of those roles.
And while I don't feel like I have a good enough lens to say whether the movie is problematic or not from a racial standpoint or good from a racial standpoint, we can ask this about the gender dynamics. Do you think this film is feminist? Do you think this film is misogynist? Do you think it's something in between?
It's a hard question for me to answer because
It
I
is
don't
hard.
think it's specifically commenting on women, more so on men in regards to women. I think, like, I was listening
Okay.
to, oh God, who does You're Wrong About? Sarah from You're Wrong About talk about this movie on her podcast. And she made this one statement and then totally didn't say anything else about it. And I wanted to do more research, but she was like, what if the hotel is a representation of the patriarchy? And I was like, well, what if? And then I started thinking about how, this is 1980. So also the first wave feminism was happening. We talked a lot about that in our Carrie episode. And then I was like, oh, to me, Jack's character is kind of a response to women like gaining independence at this time.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of feels like I was saying that he feels threatened by Danny. I can see his masculinity feel like he's being threatened by women coming to take over his job and take over independence and be
Yeah.
equal. Oh no.
Since Wendy's the one who does like all the work at the hotel.
She does. She does. And I feel like, yeah, he could feel emasculated because of that because he's not doing his fucking job that he got hired for. But he's the one that got the interview.
Yep.
Yeah. That being said, I don't think that this movie is feminist or misogynist. I do think that it directly comments on gender in that way of just like in specifically men responding to women and equality.
Do you think Wendy is a strong character? Not just in terms of like, is she a good character, but is she like a strong person and a strong character? You know what I mean? It's
I think in a lot I know that people have a lot to say about this. I think
people do.
she's realistic. I like
Mm.
the moments that we get with her where we see her being a good mom. We see her, doing her duties around the hotel. Like she's just a woman who has a husband who has a serious problem and a family that has been broken and she is trying so hard to make do. And like this is a moment where she breaks down but still like pushes through. Of course she's going to be fucking crying and flailing around while she's
Yeah.
saving her son's life. Like this woman has been fighting not just in the past month or the past week. She's been fighting for the past 5 months, even
Yeah.
longer.
I find her the first like kind of monologue she gives when she's discussing the time that Jack hurt Danny, that he broke his arm or pulled it out of its socket, something like that. And when she talks about it and she's like almost justifying him, she's almost apologizing about it, and then she's like, oh, and he also like got sober right after that because of it, so it's all good now. Except he didn't get sober right after that. He gives us a timeline later in the movie. He says that happened 3 years ago and he's only been sober for 5 months.
Oh, so she's been fighting for 3 years. Yeah, I missed that.
And I also just it's not I don't believe her, to be clear. I believe her, but you can see in her performance that she is like holding stuff back, that she's like trying to justify him more than
Yes.
he deserves because she doesn't want to leave him. She wants to stay with him, and I think that's human. And I think she's the one who made him get sober. I mean that is a point in the book. I think that she basically tells him get sober or I'm leaving. And I think it's implied that it happened in the movie, but it feels like more of a fight here.
Yeah, yeah, she says
Yeah.
it in the film, when she's talking to the doctor after the doctor examines Danny.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, she says, "I told him I'll leave you if you don't." Yeah.
No, no, she doesn't say that. She just says that he got sober. She makes it sound like it was his decision.
No. No.
Am I wrong?
Am I wrong? No, no, no. No, I swear. Because the line is, "And he hasn't, and I didn't," being the end of the I know those are the exact words, and that being the end of, like, if he doesn't get sober, I'm leaving him, and he hasn't, and I didn't.
I would need to watch it again.
I know. I'm not gonna pull it up right now.
Yeah, we remember the scene differently. One of us is right, or we're both right, and the scene implies both and is worded in a tightropey way, which I think is really the point, that it's just walking a thin tightrope where you can read it in multiple ways. And I mean, she's talking to a doctor. She doesn't want the doctor to call child services.
That's true. That's also a way to read this film. There are so many different ways to read these scenes, yeah.
I think that she is justifying him to an extent. I also think that a lot of that is just that he's been gaslighting her for years and
But
years.
also, what are you supposed to do? You're just gonna sit there and be like, "Yeah, my husband's beating my kid and I'm still with him." I'm like, you lose all respect.
And I want to make the point that while we can argue about what it means for the racial representation that Halloran is killed, for the gender representation, it means that Wendy and Danny have to fight for themselves. They do
Yes.
not get saved by anyone at the end of this. All Halloran does is give them a way out. He only does is bring a vehicle.
Oh,
Wendy
yeah.
and Danny are fully given the power to live or die, and it is up to them to fight their way out of this hotel. And I think that makes them stronger. I like that Wendy does not get beaten to a pulp this time. She fights, she escapes. She's crying the whole time, but why wouldn't she be? And what's wrong with that?
Yeah, what is wrong with that?
She does it. She gets out.
Yeah, tears aren't always a sign of weakness. Tears are a sign of, like, I had fucking trauma, dude. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of emotions going on through her right now. Her husband, the person that she loves and has been fighting for however long they've been together, the father of her child, is coming after her with an axe saying, "I'm going to bash your head in." Like, that's not easy to process in
Mhm.
real time while you are also trying to save your life. That's so much going on.
Yeah, I think this movie would be significantly weaker without the way it depicts Wendy and without Shelley Duvall's performance.
Yes.
I really think that she is what pulls the film together and grounds it in emotional stakes.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed.
It becomes her story instead of Jack's story. I guess the other point on gender dynamics would be that woman in room 237.
Yeah, she's interesting. I never, like, really had a theory on who she was, and it always bothered me every time I watched this movie because I was like, "I don't
Yeah.
get it."
And she does disappear. After
Yeah.
that, like, they build up to it so much. They're like, this is going to be the scariest thing. This is the main threat of the movie. And then they see her, they get out. And then Jack goes like, oh, I didn't say anything. Which, again, he's gaslighting his wife. Just straight up saying he didn't say anything. Which he did see something, obviously. And then they never even mention her again after that.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird. And to me, it kinda is just another because she is the other female character presented in the movie besides the
Mhm.
doctor, I guess,
And the twins.
and the assistant and the twins. Yes. Great. Okay, but the only one with, like, significance, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I think it's another representation of Jack's misogyny,
Yeah.
as in she, first appears as this beautiful woman and then turns into a rotting corpse, essentially. And it kind of said something to me on the old hags, like witch hags, old lady
Mm.
hags that has been in folklore for like hundreds and hundreds of years. And hags are these characters that did end up going into witch lore, but are these old women who would disguise themselves as beautiful young women
Oh, interesting.
in order to trick men.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like feeds into that view of how some men see women, which is just like just there for them and just tricking them into being beautiful. How dare you lure me with your makeup? How dare you make me feel all sexy for you and you're ugly? Like that horrible mindset that is misogynistic. And I feel like Jack kind of has here.
Did this scene scare you when you first saw it? Not the movie as a whole, this scene specifically.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first saw this movie, this scene broke me. I was a very scared child.
It broke you.
Literally everything scared me as a kid. Like
Oh,
everything. The Halloween episode of Jimmy Neutron, nightmares.
The pants episode?
No, the Halloween episode was the one where they like Sheen turns into a werewolf, Carl turns into Dracula, that one.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, fair.
Yeah, everything scared me as a kid. And then in that like first year of college, I watched The Shining, and this scene specifically scared me so much. I had nightmares for a month, and then nothing ever scared me again.
Wait, so but why?
This like immediately desensitized me to horror. I thought about this a lot about why. The one thing, I think the fact that she doesn't come back, it twists film convention in this weird way because you expect her to come back. You think that's the point. And then she doesn't by the end of the movie, and they don't even like reference her again. So it almost gaslights you into being like, was that in the movie? Did I imagine that part? Is she still coming back? But
Oh.
I also do wonder with all this like misogyny stuff that you're talking about, like, I'm a straight man. I definitely have my own shares of toxicities, which I've dealt with over the years and was less aware of at that point in my life. And it is like it presents you with this like beautiful naked woman, and then she transforms into this old withered corpse, like literally rotting. And it kind of just disarms you in this really
Mhm.
interesting way, or at least as someone who is attracted to women, it is disarming. I don't know how much of an effect it has on someone who is not. I imagine it's still probably scary, but I do think the effect changes to some degree. This is all like hypothesizing. Like I have no idea. I
Sure.
can't speak for people who are not attracted to women or for other people who are attracted to women. I don't know what other people think of this scene.
Yeah, no, I and to speak to a straight woman's side, it is objectifying women, and I can see where that fear comes from as a man who has suffered from reckoning, I'm sure, with that throughout your life in the
Hmm.
patriarchal world that we live in. I think this scene does objectify women, whether or not that's meant from Kubrick or King, but definitely from Jack's point of view. And that's why it's scary to me, is because when you look at yourself as the woman represented on screen, you're either this wife who is fighting for her
Hmm.
life at every opportunity and literally can't hold herself up because she is so worn down from the life that she has been living, or this sexualized object, or this rotting corpse in the tub, or the twins who are hacked to death by yet another man.
But this is fascinating because so for you, the fear comes from identifying with the woman,
Yes,
whereas for me, the fear comes from identifying with Jack in that scene.
right. And so then it is commenting on gender dynamics then in that sense.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, and
Oh
it's such a
man.
quick scene.
Yeah.
Okay, David. So I do want to move us along. We said we get back to it. Let's get back to it. The abuse that is
Yeah.
presented in this film. I guess let's start here. We did ask if Jack is sympathetic, empathetic, is redeemable. Is he redeemable?
Great. Let's just address elephant in the room. This is a big source of tension because Stephen King, like he doesn't like this movie, and the main reason he gives is how there's less emphasis on Jack's alcoholism, and Jack is not redeemed in the end, and Jack's just portrayed as an absolute monster. And King has talked about how in the book, Jack was basically a Stephen King surrogate character.
As all his books are.
So seeing that character portrayed as an absolute monster upset him. And I get that. At the same time, I kind of disagree with Stephen King. I don't think Jack
Oh.
is an absolute monster in this movie. I think there's a
Oh.
lot that's ambiguous. I think we don't know how much of him, how much he can be held accountable for his actions, that he does feel like he's being possessed, at least to some extent. And I think it's more complicated and more gray than Stephen King makes it out to be.
That's so interesting because that's not at all my read. um, where I fight back is like the thing this film does not do is like I don't get enough of Jack before he goes mad,
Yes.
which is hard for me to like empathize with him in any way because all I see is him being this angry, violent character, and then other characters talking about him as an angry and violent character.
Yeah. That is, I mean, yeah, we don't see that much of him. We see him in the interview where he's clearly putting on an act to some degree, so we don't
Yeah.
really know who he is from that. And then I guess we see him in the car ride where he seems a little aggravated. Although, to be fair, who wouldn't be driving a car for like 5 hours or whatever with a small child?
I mean, sure, but yeah, he just is coming off as aggravated, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the first scene we see with him with Danny, with the whole
Yes.
family. Yeah.
Yes. But does that mean that his anger can be given to him? There's also an open question, I think, of whether he's actually drinking alcohol in the movie.
Oh, beyond the scene where we see him
No,
drink
including
alcohol.
that scene, because
Oh,
there's no alcohol in the hotel. They make it like they bring you at the beginning of the movie into the bar, and Ullman says straight up, "But we're not stocked, so I hope you guys don't wanna drink anything because there is no alcohol in the hotel. We take it all out for insurance reasons." And then
right.
Jack goes, "Well, that's fine because I'm sober anyway,
He says,
and
"We don't drink," which
we
is,
don't drink."
yeah. Anyway, continue.
Um,
I just always was rubbed the wrong way by that. I don't know why. Like,
really, why? Maybe Wendy doesn't drink.
oh, and I'm sure
Yeah.
maybe Wendy doesn't drink, but I don't know, for him to answer for her and say like we, or like to take away it from being like his responsibility of I don't drink. Like he doesn't take a responsibility in his alcoholism. I think that goes back to what we were saying is like whether or not Wendy makes him or threatens him to stop drinking. It takes away the responsibility for his actions.
Mm,
He does end up going back on the wagon, falling off the wagon, whichever one it is. He does end
he
up like
might,
he might. He might.
if you believe he's actually drinking, which even if the ghosts are real, like, is that actually alcohol or is it ghost alcohol? Like, can you get drunk off ghost alcohol?
Well, is it bad then with just him having the idea of drink, and he does it, he goes back to the bar several times to drink.
Yeah.
So, like, is there something bad about that as an alcoholic?
I mean, the other question you can ask is, does it reflect better or worse on him if he's not drinking alcohol?
How do you mean?
Does he try to kill his family because he fell off the wagon? Does he try to kill the family because he's possessed by the hotel? Or does he try to kill his family because he's just a shitty person? Like it's
Yeah.
kind of those are the three options. And I think all three of them can be argued.
Yeah, I can see all 3 of them being true at the same time too. Like,
Sure.
I definitely see, to go back to the aggression theory of when we were talking about race and gender, I think addiction falls into that as well. It's like he feels emasculated by his son, feels emasculated by people who are not white. He feels emasculated by his wife and women in general, and he feels emasculated because he doesn't have control over substance abuse, right? It's like
Yeah.
when he falls off the wagon, I'm sure there's a guilt there that makes him feel like he is even more or even less than to everybody else.
Yeah. And then he feels emasculated when he fails and when he locks him in the storage unit. And then Grady comes and rubs it in. He's like, you don't have to rub it in, which is another joke, by the way.
There's a joke.
I still laugh at that part. That's great. You don't have to rub it in.
Grady, yeah, let's talk about Grady for a second, because like
Okay.
Grady, when I was looking at this movie again with the like, oh, what if the hotel is the patriarchy? I saw Grady can be read as a woman annihilator, one who is like forcing Jack to do the same. How do you view Grady in this movie?
What stood out to me on this watch is that, I mean, Grady was the caretaker, even though he says that he wasn't. But even as a ghost, he is still a servant. That the annihilating force in this hotel is not Allman or whoever owns the hotel. It's not the some founder who built it. It is another servant. And really, everyone who Jack interacts with as ghosts, it's Grady, who is a waiter. It's
Mhm.
Lloyd, the bartender, the one in room 237 it's complicated, but she's kind of just a person who stays there and killed herself over loving things.
Oh, is that in
If
the
you
book?
That's in the book. That's not
Okay.
said explicitly in the movie, but in the book
Okay.
it gives you that backstory. All these ghosts are not people in power, and Jack himself is the
Mm.
caretaker. He is an employee here. So who is the person in power? And I mean, I guess it's kind of just the hotel. And
Mm.
it's feeding off of this emasculation of all of these people who are trapped here.
Yeah.
We're never given any indication that Ullman is even aware that there are ghosts here.
No, you're right. You know what? My simple answer is yes. I totally agree with that read. Love that read.
Right.
So my question is this a happy ending? Yeah, I love that. Just heavy sigh. Just heavy sigh.
It depends, because like you said, we don't know enough about Jack. I think it's good that Wendy leaves him. I think that she would have left him sooner, but it is very difficult to do. This is also why I prefer movie Wendy to book Wendy, because I believe that movie Wendy tried to make it work. I don't believe book Wendy trying to make it work.
That's a good point. No, yeah, I agree because I question like what am I rooting for in this family? Like, am I rooting for Wendy to leave him? I think so. Am I rooting for Jack to like get better and write his novel and like have a family again? Like, I don't think I am. Like, I think I do ultimately want Danny and Wendy to be okay and to leave. Is it a happy ending?
Even if we take that Jack is sympathetic, Wendy should still leave him.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Like,
he's still abusive and horrible. Even if this is because he's influenced by his alcoholism prior to the hotel, like when he hurt Danny, even if that's because he's an alcoholic. Okay, good. I want you to get better. I want you to help yourself, but I'm not required to stay for that part.
yeah.
And you want Wendy to get away even just for her and Danny's safety. Like when he's was on that bottle, he was reckless and abusive, and again, he did not actually get sober right after he hurt Danny. It was another 2.5 years until he actually got sober.
And who knows if Danny was being hurt in the meantime? Like, that was just the time that they went to the hospital. Like,
Yep, that's true.
who knows what's happening in between there?
Yeah.
You brought up this theory, and I want to know more about it. You said there's a possibility that Wendy is abusive?
Okay, to be
As a
clear,
theory,
I
as a
don't
theory.
this is not my theory. I want to be really clear. I do not agree with this. I think it's fascinating that someone thought this and that it became really popular for a little bit. They call it the Wendy theory. It originated on a YouTube video, and basically it recontextualizes the movie. It uses like the continuity errors throughout the film. There's a lot of continuity errors, some of which I'll even admit are kind of weird, like light switches appearing and disappearing. Like, how did that happen? And some of which are completely explainable. Like, oh, Danny's in a different position on the carpet. Okay, well, they probably shot that on a different day. And Stanley Kubrick does not care about continuity. There are a
No.
lot of continuity errors in Stanley Kubrick's resume, but it's commonly talked about how Kubrick is a perfectionist, which is true in many respects. One thing he was never a perfectionist about was continuity.
Yeah, can we just close this right here? He's a perfectionist about what is in the frame, which is why things never fucking match. It's all
Yes.
about what looks good before I do a cut, and then we're gonna change stuff to make that fucking image look good. Continuity is not in his perfectionism.
In a shot with Jack, there's a chair that appears and disappears behind him. I would fully believe that they did like 76 takes, and then Kubrick said, "Hey, that chair is ugly. Let's get rid of it." And then they did another 20 takes without it, and then in the edit they used bits of both.
Exactly, 1000%. Like, you can be a perfectionist. There are too many things that happen on a film set for you to be a perfectionist about every single one of them.
That doesn't mean that we can't read the continuity errors as meaning something. For me, it just gives further implication that the house is alive, that the hotel's alive,
Great. Love
and that
it.
it's shifting and weird and it doesn't all make sense. And I think that's cool. But for the Wendy theory, they took the continuity errors and said first they took a version of the continuity that they said is real based on the walkthrough at the beginning of the movie with Ullman. They said all that stuff is real. So anytime it doesn't match that, it is actually Wendy's hallucination. And she is hallucinating everything. It says Wendy is the one who strangled Danny in room 237, and Jack actually didn't see anyone there.
Why?
It's really obnoxious, and I don't like it. And thankfully, people have caught on now that this is complete bullshit and
Well,
is easily debunkable in many, many ways.
and it's kind of sexist?
Yeah,
Like, what is the reason behind this, like, "Oh, Wendy's making it all up?" What in the movie gives you that other than that she's a woman who is unstable because of her current situation?
I'm definitely abridging, to be clear, so you guys can look more into this yourselves if you're interested. But I agree with that takeaway, Devin. And I'm not saying that the person who originated this theory was like intentionally trying to create something that is sexist, but I do think that it is odd that they took a movie about domestic abuse and that includes some moments of gaslighting
Yeah.
and basically said, okay, actually, all those gaslighting parts are the truth. And Wendy is actually the one who is horrible, and Jack is just a perfectly loving husband who's trying to get by with this schizophrenic wife.
Oh, those Jack sympathizers. Oh, ugh.
Yeah.
Interesting theory that is put out there. Don't at all agree because of everything that you just said. But yeah.
This is why I say that I'm a little intimidated by this movie because there have been a lot of theories, and a lot of them are crackpot.
Yes, a lot of them a lot of theories that have been presented about this film, I think people find one thing that they learn and then they hold on to it and use it to explain everything else. Whereas like the evidence doesn't build the theory, more as like a moment pushes evidence into theory, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost like this movie becomes a Rorschach test.
Yeah, that's a good way to put
Yeah.
it.
And what's annoying in this one is that whenever all these theories, they always seem to conclude Stanley Kubrick intended this, is always the
Yes.
thing. There's a theory that's actually about the Holocaust, which isn't as bad as many of the others. I still think that it's weird. I mean, in the book, there's a whole thing with the boiler room, and I feel like if the movie
Yeah.
were about the Holocaust, then they would have left the boiler room in there to represent the gas chambers, and Jack needs to maintain the boiler room.
I had that exact note, David. I had that exact note. That's so funny.
But like Diane Johnson in that article actually talks about that theory and says, "Oh, well, if Kubrick intended that, he never told me."
Yeah.
She doesn't even dismiss the theory. She just straight up says, "I never heard about that."
Which, like, he doesn't need to. Like, there are differences between what you can, like, do in directing versus screenwriting, but at the same time, like, you think that you would tell your collaborator who's writing the theme for
Yeah.
the film if that was intended.
And I think if you want to read the Holocaust into the movie, I personally see it as a stretch, but you go for it. It was not Kubrick's intention. I'm sorry. I don't believe that it was Kubrick's intention.
No, I don't
If
think
you
so
want
either.
to argue that it's there unintentionally, great. Have at it. It's a whole different thing to say it's the director's intention.
Yeah.
Room 237 has someone very thoroughly convinced that Stanley Kubrick airbrushed his own face into the clouds in the beginning of the
I
movie.
don't see it. I don't and they
No,
go through
because
it.
it's not there.
I
I love the guy actually when he's talking about this airbrushing as he keeps rambling and rambling. At some point, he literally gets like, "Yeah, if I wanted to make it more obvious for you, then like I would need to Photoshop it." And I'm like, "But
like,
that's what?"
then you're doctoring, then it's not obvious. Then it's not obvious. I also really wanna believe that that guy watched the entire 3-hour film going frame by frame by frame.
He definitely did.
Like, oh my god, that's so much. That's so much.
These folks watch the movie forwards and backwards at the same time, superimposed on top of each other, and then draw conclusions based on how the frames lined up, which they line up frequently because, like we said, Kubrick is a perfectionist in his framing and he
Yeah.
really likes geometric framing. So a lot of the shots are framed similarly. So therefore, they just line up a lot.
Which you can see in his past work and
Yeah.
the work that he does after this. Like, he does have very specifics. And I will say, some will call him an auteur. Do you wanna talk about this, David? We don't have to. We can skip over it, but I know this is a big thing for you, and I wanna give you the space.
I hate auteur theory. With a passion. I really, really hate auteur theory. Uh, do you wanna explain what auteur theory is for people?
Well, I was gonna ask you too because now I'm like, I'm not exactly sure. My perception of what auteur theory is, I think may differ from yours, so maybe you should just correct
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong. But auteurs in a position of a director is a person with a very specific style that is put onto the film regardless of content. Some famous auteurs like Quentin Tarantino, Wes Anderson, Sofia Coppola, these are people who very specifically have a style where you're like, "Ah, that is a Sofia Coppola film. I could know that film from anywhere." Auteur theory is something I'm less sure on. Is that more of like we will do anything that the auteur tells us to do? What is it?
Not really. I mean, I think everything you said is completely right. The annoying thing about auteur theory is that I think it gets twisted a lot, and even, like, my problems with it aren't necessarily the original intent behind it, but
What's the actual Oh, sorry.
it
What's the
was
actual
I would need to look up the original stuff again, but basically the idea is that every work has some singular author, and in film that is typically the director, and we can attribute every decision that is seen on screen to the director.
Oh, I don't agree with that at all. Filmmaking is a collaborative medium.
Yeah,
What?
and I do want to be clear because I hate this theory for a number of reasons. One of them is what you said. Filmmaking is a very collaborative process, and I don't like discrediting other people. I straight up didn't know that Diane Johnson existed until I watched the movie again and saw her name in the credits and went, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, to be totally honest, I didn't either. Um,
I had no idea.
which is
Like,
horrible.
it makes sense. I think Kubrick often used a co-writer on many of his movies.
And the way that she describes the experience is that it was very collaborative is what it seemed like.
Yeah, Kubrick was actually really open to collaborations a lot throughout his work. He improvised a lot of things on the day often. If a crew member said, "This is how I want to be," then Kubrick would say, "Great, if that's what'll work, let's do that." I read a thing from the DP, the cinematographer of The Shining, who talks about like, it would really help us if we built the hotel this way. And Kubrick said, "Great, let's do that."
Yeah, but people don't focus on that, and they focus then on the things that Kubrick puts his foot down on, which
Yes.
any director slash any manager of anything has to be able to be lenient, but also strict in order to
Yes.
execute and create a finished product. And so, yes, there are some things that he was difficult about. Some of them being the set having to be rebuilt the same way after the set burned down or something like that. You know, like
I looked that up. That didn't affect filming at all. It burned down after they finished shooting in that set. Because someone used that to like explain the continuity errors, and I was like, "Oh, is that true?" So I googled it. They did rebuild the set, but they rebuilt it differently so that Steven Spielberg could use it in Raiders of the Lost Ark for the Snake Pit.
oh, cool.
The Snake Pit in Raiders of the Lost Ark is actually the lounge of the Overlook Hotel.
Oh, shit. Wow. Anyway, we have to talk about it, is his directing style of working with the actors specifically, because
Yes.
that would be one thing where people hone in on.
Yes. And this is the other reason I hate auteur theory is because I don't want to say that auteur theory created abuse of directors, because obviously abuse of directors were a thing before auteur theory. Hitchcock was way worse than Stanley Kubrick.
Yes.
I also want to be clear that I don't think Stanley Kubrick is the best example of an abusive director. I think that many directors were significantly worse. Polanski was worse. John Landis accidentally killed a bunch of people accidentally, but through like criminal negligence. Well, I guess it wasn't criminal negligence because he was acquitted in court. Anyway,
Because he was on drugs.
but Kubrick does many, 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 many takes. The Shining either is or was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most number of takes in a dialogue scene, that being the staircase scene.
Oh, is it like 175 or something?
I thought it was 120 something, but you could
Oh,
be
okay.
right. I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know either. Great. Somewhere definitely well over 100.
And with all the setups and resets and whatnot, some of these scenes they would be doing multiple days on the same shot. So also asking why is the chair there in one take and not the other? It might have been a different day, man.
Yeah, totally. And just for some context, normal amount of takes is anywhere from 2 to 5 is pushing it. And you would only do 5 if there's like a technical error.
5 isn't that rare. It does depend a bit on the director and it does depend a bit on the scene. Some
Yes.
scenes are more complicated and will require more takes. If you aren't planning on cutting away from something, then you're going to need more takes. Then you're probably going 10 at least. If it's a long scene that you're shooting in one take.
I think the most I've gotten up to is 10 or 11. And that's like a big thing.
The
Yeah.
most I've gotten was 35. It was a
Oh my god.
commercial. The shot was they open the door and the guy smiles, but it was a commercial, so the clients had a lot of notes.
Yeah, I mean that's that when there's money and clients involved, it's a very different. When there's an indie film and you only have so much time and so much money, you ain't getting more than 10 takes, dude.
Yep, that is
Yeah.
definitely true because then at some point it's like, dude, we have another scene to shoot. When you have a lot of money like The Shining had, then you can just keep going.
Yeah.
When no one is managing you or reeling you in at all. And a lot of the mythology of Kubrick is that like he needed all those takes, and I disagree. Like obviously that's an opinion. That's gonna be an opinion no matter which way you spin it, but I disagree.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it. He could be a perfectionist, but you're never going to get the perfect shot. I always remember, I think we learned this in film school. There was that movie that was all one shot that's like Austrian or something. Do you remember what
Russian
I'm talking
Ark.
about? Yes. Say it again.
Russian Ark.
Yes. And there's that one guy who looks at the camera and he's like supposedly the only fault in that shot for the entire movie. And the director's like, well, yeah, I mean, humans are humans. We have errors, like something. There's no way I was ever going to get a perfect version. You kind of have to live with that. That's what art is.
Yeah.
Like art, it's especially film, is supposed to be most of the time a reflection of the human experience. And part of the human experience is flawed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a few. I mean, we'll never know for sure why Kubrick forced this many takes. Some say it is to get a certain performance out of Shelley Duvall. I feel like that's really demeaning to Shelley Duvall as an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a big thing with directors and people who look at actors regardless, Hitchcock being one of them, is like part of the collaborative process of filmmaking involves the performer. You need to trust your performers and the performers need to trust you. And if they're not getting what you need, then maybe you made the wrong hire. I'm sorry. Like you shouldn't have to force them to be at a point where she is on the floor exhausted, having a panic attack and unable to stand up because she is so exhausted. I mean, that's insane.
I'll tell you why I think he did so many takes. And again, this is speculation / opinion. I think it's just because he wasn't very good at working with actors. And I think he even knew that to some extent.
I think that's totally fair.
There's a great clip of Robert Duvall, who I don't think Robert Duvall he's no relation to Shelley Duvall, never worked with Kubrick. But there's a bit where he's at a round table and they're talking about directors do a million takes. Duvall just goes off and is like, and Stanley Kubrick did all these takes. Have you seen a Stanley Kubrick movie? He has these amazing actors and they give horrible performances. Why did he need that many takes?
Exactly.
I think the performances work better in this one because it's such a surreal movie. But like,
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
apparently, a lot of the time when he's doing all of these takes, the actors would say, "What do you want me to do differently?" And he would just say, "Just do it differently."
Yeah, that's bad. That's so bad.
And the idea is he didn't know what he wanted, he just knew what he didn't want. That's not good directing, though.
No.
And to be clear, Duvall was definitely not the only actor who he like tortured in this way. It does feel like she was singled out a bit on this set, although Scatman Carruthers also like broke down crying as well. But he had a smaller role, thankfully, so he didn't have to go through as hard a time as she did. But I think a lot of it is that her role was specifically difficult, and it's a miracle that she's as good as she is in this movie. I don't think
Yeah.
any other actor could have given that good of a performance under those conditions.
There's one more thing with Shelley Duvall that I found out. And I'm like, oh, this poor woman. The trauma that she went in right before this. Do you know about this?
I know she had a breakup.
The breakup, she was dating Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel. For years, they were living together. She introduced him to Carrie Fisher, her friend, and they ran away together. That's what happened right before she shot this film.
Mm,
How horrible is that?
damn.
Right? And then you have to go into this like abusive situation where like the guy that's supposed to be your husband is like
Yeah.
yelling and screaming at you and like says that he wants you dead after like you just went through the trauma of like the person that you love totally abandoning you and also losing a good friend.
Yeah, you need to be a rock and you get up there and say, I am a rock, I am
Thank
an
you.
island, and a rock has no tears, and an island never cries. Except I have to cry. That's my job right now is to cry.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Well,
But yeah, Kubrick did this to other actors in other movies too. Malcolm McDowell has talked about. I mean, all these actors like say good things about Kubrick. To be clear, they're all like, "Oh, but it was worth it because the movie is so good."
mm,
Which, I mean, yeah, of course you would say that. Malcolm McDowell talks about like being tortured literally on A Clockwork Orange, like in the scenes where his character is being tortured. It wasn't that much better in reality than what you're presented on screen. It hurt him a lot and it scratched his cornea. Matthew Modine, who's the lead in Full Metal Jacket, wanted to go to the hospital where his wife was giving birth to their first child, and Stanley Kubrick wouldn't let him go until he grabbed a knife and threatened to cut himself. He's like, I'll cut myself and then they'll have to bring me to the hospital. Or you can just let me go. Kubrick was like, fine, but come back right after. And they didn't even use him for the next few days anyway. Like, this is horrible.
wow. And that's fucking horrible. And like, if anyone wonders why SAG went on strike, like these are the evolutions that need to be happening in the film industry where like people are treated like fucking people and like this is treated like a fucking job. Like at the end of the
Yeah.
day, yes, we're making art, but it's a job. This is the workplace. You need to treat people with respect. And yes, I'm not saying that you can't like make sacrifices for your art and like push yourself to the limits on your art. But there has to be consent with the other people who are doing this for you. You can't just say, hey, sheep, according to Alfred Hitchcock, go run into the river and bleed and get sepsis. That's not happened. I don't know why I just came up with that story. You have to be like, hey, is it okay if like we put you in the river? Are you comfortable with this? If not, we'll find alternatives. That's totally fine. We can make this work. We have so much money and CGI. Like there is
Well,
literally
we
such
have
thing called
CGI
movie
now.
now. But there's so many
Yeah.
other things that you can do. And art is meant to like push you to a limit, and then you problem solve. And then maybe you'll come up with something even better. You don't just like, I don't know. I can rant on
Yes.
this all day. I think we should wind down.
Yes. Let's do it. You
Let's
wanna talk
do it.
about the moon landing?
Oh my god, I forgot. Oh my god, we're so far into this that we're like the moon landing. What about the moon landing, David?
I feel like you're more into this than I am. It just annoys me. But again, that documentary, Room 237, because people idolize Kubrick so much and they think that everything he does is so incredibly intentional because he's such a perfectionist. So they watched The Shining and they said, oh, this is Kubrick telling us that he faked the moon landing.
And the evidence of it being Danny's wearing a sweater with Apollo 11.
Mm-hmm.
There's some foreground stuff that is literally just like a filmmaking tactic. I don't understand that. What else is there?
Jack says that he has a contract with his employers.
It's like it's a bunch of like really small stuff that again, this is an example of like they have a theory and now are pushing it through a lens onto the film.
Yes. Yes.
I will say this is a theory that I love. Look, I don't think Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landing. I don't think that that is possible. We had just said how strictly perfectionist and awful he is to work with. Why in the world would the government hire Stanley Kubrick to make something? There are many people out there who
Good
can
point.
make something like the moon landing and have it be believable.
Also, I think the biggest debunk I heard was that in the moon landing footage, the shadows are too parallel, and in order to do that, the light source would have to be either very, very, very far away, aka the sun, or it would have to be a laser grid, which that technology did not exist in the 1960s. And also, there would have to be so many people involved in this lie that, like, you really like, not all of them would have been government. Some of them would have been film people. Some of them would have just been, like, scientists and mathematicians. Like, someone would have leaked it.
It sucks because like I want to believe that the moon landing, at least this footage, was incorrect. I do believe that we landed on the moon. I just like do question, did we do it before the Russians? That's it. That's all I but I yes, I
I
agree
don't
with you.
question it.
But we talked so much in the blob about the Red Scare in America and how that was such a big deal that I feel like why would we not try to fake something in order to get ahead of the Russians?
Because we went to the moon.
I don't believe we
We went
didn't
to
go
the
to the
moon
moon.
repeatedly.
I agree. No, I agree we went to the moon. I 1000% agree we went to the moon. I just don't necessarily believe we did it when we said we did it. Maybe. It's a fun conspiracy theory.
Someone would have leaked that.
How do you know?
Oh, God.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to say on The Shining? We're 2 hours into this, so I might just say,
Yeah,
"No, we're
I'm
cutting it off."
good. Now it's time for Rob's favorite part of the show, the bone review section, where we rate each movie or the movie on a scale of 1 to 4 bones. Devin, what did you think of The Shining?
Oh, The Shining. I think this is a great movie. Like hands down, I think there are many, many issues with it, but like there's a reason why people get this reaction from this film. There is a reason why people have a strong reaction to this movie. There's a reason why we have been sitting here for over 2 hours talking about this movie. I think this movie is powerful. Does it have flaws? Yes. I think a lot of them do stem from Jack's character, and I said it a lot throughout the episode, but he doesn't have a full arc to me. He is kind of like one note, guy goes mad in a hotel. It's what everyone hates about quote women go crazy's films is that the number one critique that they give is that like she's just crazy. I think Jack is just crazy. I think the filmmaking is obviously strong. The shots, the Steadicam for its early use is like so incredible. I think very powerful. The production design is so incredible. Like have to give that nod. Anyway, overall, I will say 3 bone movie. It has its flaws that I said throughout the episode, so I feel like I'm not going to hark on it too much. What about you, sir?
I have such a love-hate relationship with this movie. As I've said, it is undeniably important to my journey through horror films in that it instantaneously desensitized me to horror by being so goddamn scary. And now I feel like every time I watch it, it's either less impactful or more impactful based on the previous time I watched it. Like, I wish I could watch this movie for the first time again. Like, this is one of those movies where it's so bogged down with all of this analysis and overanalysis. Like, I know that basically all we do on this podcast is overanalyze movies, but The Shining has really been overanalyzed and mythologized to an unnecessary extent, and it annoys me. Like, it's hard for me to watch the movie and just be scared or find something funny or like even just take it at face value. It feels like homework now, like an intellectual exercise instead of a reactionary one. That the mood and feelings of the film feel like they've been stripped out in favor of just dissecting it into a husk, and it's hard to enjoy anymore. But it's still like a good movie, and it's not really the movie's fault that it's been obliterated by people. I do think it's flawed. I understand why Stanley Kubrick was nominated for a Worst Director Razzie for this movie. I don't necessarily agree with that nomination. He breaks a lot of conventions in this film, and the comedy, which I think is absolutely present, is weird enough to feel like it's just filmmaking mistakes a lot of the time. So I understand why you would give him a Razzie. That's like even aside from just his horrible treatment of actors and Shelley Duvall especially. I'll also give it 3 bones. It's a good movie, and I think it's an improvement on the book.
Oh, yeah. Unpopular opinion.
But what's the unpopular part is that I think Wendy's a much better character in the movie than she is in the book.
Yeah.
That's the unpopular part.
Well, we did it. We did one movie. It's still just as long as our normal episodes, so
Yeah.
huzzah there. I guess that's what happens when we let ourselves go. And when we cover The Shining, honestly, that's what happens when we cover The Shining.
Yeah, it's The Shining.
Well, I'm happy that we did this. Again, congrats on 100 films. That's crazy. And excited to do 100 more.
Hell yeah, we will. For sure. 100 more years of Cadaver Dogs podcast.
Do you want to hear 100 more years on Cadaver Dogs podcast? Did you like our one episode or one movie episode? Albeit, I'm sure ones in the future will be shorter than this one. Let us know. Hit us up on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter at Cadaver Dogs Pod or Cadaver Dogs Podcast. We are on YouTube. However, David has made the statement that you cannot DM us on YouTube. So please hit us up elsewhere or just email us at cadaverdogspodcast@gmail.com. We read our email. Give us your suggestions. What do you want us to cover?
Who do you want on? Any guests? Ooh. We have
Ooh.
guests now. Not in this episode because things were too chaotic with our lives. I'm directing a short film in 2 weeks.
Yeah, go online and wish good luck to David to direct his short film in a couple weeks. Guys, it's going to be so exciting. Can't wait to share with you all who is in it, what it's about, and where it's going. You're going to have to wait and see. All right. See you, Mutts.
Peace. No beer and no TV make Homer go crazy.